Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're really happy that you're here. I know it's a busy time of year. My name is Kim Dinkins. I'm Save the Manatee Club's Senior Conservation Associate. I've been with the group for about 8 months. TRA and I started about the same time, but my background is in water quality issues and natural resources policy. So I'll hand it over to TRA.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiara Frederick, and I'm Save the Manatee Club's manatee biologist, and I will be giving today's presentation on manatee deaths, algal blooms, and seagrass loss in the Indian River Lagoon. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about what is the Florida manatee. Florida manatee is a large, slow-moving marine mammal. They can be around 10 feet long, and they weigh about 1,000 to over 1,000 pounds. There are 3 species of manatees in the world, but we have the Florida manatee here in Florida. And there are around 6,000 manatees in Florida. The last estimate was a few years ago, and we haven't had a more recent estimate. So this is the number that most of us are going with these days. Manatees are protected federally and statewide in Florida. Manatees live in a variety of habitats throughout Florida. They live in rivers, springs, canals, and bays and estuaries. They can live in many different types of habitats all throughout the state, and there are different manatees live in different sections of the state. So there are manatees that stay on the East Coast and manatees that stay on the West Coast. During the colder months, manatees can also be found in large numbers at power plants. These are photos of the Tico Big Bend Power Station. As you can see here, there are hundreds of manatees that will aggregate in these areas. And it makes you wonder, why do manatees like to go to power plants? Manatees like power plants because they don't like the cold. They don't have a lot of body fat like other marine mammals. Most marine mammals have a layer of blubber, which keeps them warm, but manatees don't have this. They can't be in water less than 68 degrees for very long or they'll get cold stress. And this image here with the red arrow is a picture of what cold stress looks like. They get lesions, their skin sloughs off, they have a lowered immune system so they can't fight off infections. It's kind of like hypothermia for humans. They get it on their extremities like their flippers and on their face. And in order to avoid getting cold stress, manatees have to stay in these warm water areas throughout the winter, like power plants. Manatees also can get this warm water at canals or springs. The freshwater springs throughout Florida are a critical part of their habitat. Many manatees will go to the same winter spots every single year, so they'll go to the same power plants or the same springs. And when the water gets warm enough, the manatees will leave these areas to go throughout the rest of Florida, and some even go outside of the state. And we like to say that manatees migrate because they move to different locations in different seasons of the year. So what do manatees eat? Manatees are generalist herbivores, so they eat over 60 different species of aquatic plants. And aquatic plants are those that grow in the water. Their favorite foods are aquatic grasses like seagrasses and eelgrass, but they'll eat just about anything. So here you can see a manatee eating from mangrove leaves. They'll eat your lawn grass. They eat invasive species. They eat a lot of different types of plants. So why is the Indian River Lagoon important for manatees? The Indian River Lagoon has calm waters. It had seagrass and mangroves, and the lagoon provides food for the animals as well as a place to rest and raise their young. It's home to thousands of manatees throughout the year, but it has the most manatees in the winter. And this is due to these canals that actually act as a warm water sink area that the manatees can go in to stay warm, and they also go to the power plants as well. So manatees face many threats. Some of these threats are boat strikes. You can see in this image here, this manatee has a boat scar on its back. One of the biggest threats to manatees are boat strikes. There's also destruction of their habitat. You can see here, this is an image of boat scarring on seagrass beds. Their habitat is also threatened by development, so damming up springs, ripping out mangroves, things like that. Another one is harassment. So anything that changes a manatee's behavior is considered harassment. That includes feeding and watering manatees because it changes what they typically would do. Manatees can become dependent on food in places where they wouldn't normally get them. Also, touching animals can separate a mother and calf, distress animals, change whether they're feeding. all of which is a big concern for manatees. Another one is entanglement in crab traps or other debris. This is a photo of a manatee with a bicycle tire wrapped around it. And then another threat for manatees are harmful algal blooms, which I'm going to go into a little more detail about. So harmful algal blooms are caused by algae. And what is algae? Algae is a plant-like organism that lives in the water. It makes food with the sun like most plants, but most algae doesn't have leaves or stems. As you can see here, this is an image of the cells of algae. They can be very, very simple. They use the sun and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in the water to grow. So an algae bloom becomes harmful when it causes detriment to the environment. So when algae grows out of control, it's called an algal bloom. Sorry. This algae blocks light to plants in the water, like seagrasses in the lagoon, and it causes the plants to die because they can't get the light that they need. And then when the algae dies, eventually it uses all of the nutrients in the system. Then the decomposition process uses the oxygen in the water, and then other animals start to die as well because they don't have access to oxygen. Some harmful algal blooms can also cause toxins like red tide. So types of harmful algal blooms, there are three main types. There's red tides, which we have mostly on the West Coast, caused by a specific type of algae that creates a toxin that can cause neurological effects. So in manatees, it can cause seizures and difficulty breathing, and animals that have this toxin need to be rescued and rehabilitated before they can be released again. There's brown and green tides, which can be found almost anywhere. And then there's blue-green algae, which grows in fresh water. So why do algae blooms happen? Algae can grow very, very fast when it has access to more nutrients. There's always nutrients in the system, but when we have an input of fertilizers or human and animal waste, we get more nutrients in the system than usual, and algae uses this to grow. It enters the lagoon through runoff and other ways as well. Another way that nutrients enter the system is through wastewater treatment. Wastewater is water used by humans in homes or commercial buildings. And while it is treated in a plant, such as in this first image right here, you can see that it's treated and then it goes back out into the water. And this is done to remove nutrients. Not all of the nutrients are actually removed. Septic tanks are also another type of wastewater treatment. It's just underground. And leaky septic tanks are also a way that nitrogen can get into the water. Over the last 10 years, the Indian River Lagoon has lost over half of all of its seagrasses due to these algal blooms. You can see here is a picture of 2013, and you can see these dark areas are seagrass. And then in 2020, it's just sand. It's all gone. So let's talk about algae blooms in the IRL. The first super bloom was in 2011 and 2012. And since then, there has been a massive bloom almost every year since then. The seagrass isn't getting a chance to grow before the next bloom comes along and kills everything. There was another huge bloom in 2015, 2016 that caused a massive fish kill. And then since 2011, the IRL has lost over 45,000 acres of seagrass. So how does this relate to the manatees? So the algae blooms have killed the seagrass, and manatees are having trouble finding food in this area. The manatees, as I said, they go to the same places every winter, even if there isn't food nearby. And during the winter, manatees can only leave these warm water areas that they go to for a little while. So if there isn't food nearby, they'll go out to look for food and not find any and have to go back. And that takes a lot of energy. And in order for them to find food eventually, they have to wait for the water to warm up so they can spread to further areas where there might be food. IRL stands for the Indian River Lagoon. Yes, sorry about that. So how are we helping manatees? How is Florida? How are we helping manatees? So the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership, which we are a partner of, is a group of organizations like nonprofits, private, state, and federal agencies that are working together to rescue, rehabilitate, and release manatees. How does this work? So the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, will receive a report of a sick or injured manatee on their alert hotline. And I would like to ask you all to take a moment and enter this number into your phones if you don't already have it. If you see a manatee out there that needs to be rescued, having the number will save you precious time in making the call. So please just take a moment and write down this number. It'll come up again. So the FWC receives a report And then they have biologists that will investigate the call. They will go to these areas where the manatees were sighted, and they will try to evaluate their health and if the animal needs to be rescued. If the manatee does need a response, the FWC will work with these agencies to rescue the animal and transport them to a rehab facility, such as a zoo. And at these facilities, the manatees are given medical care, they're given fluids and medicine and anything else they may need in order to recover. And then after that, they are released when they're deemed healthy. So this is the rescue of Mandy and Manillo. They are a mother and calf pair that were seen on our cameras at Blue Spring State Park. And the mother, you can see here, she is skinny. You can see her head, and this is what a thin manatee looks like. And they were actually rescued as a pair and rehabilitated and then released back into the St. Johns River. So this is a good story of how the MRP has saved these animals. What else is being done to help manatees? So the governor has approved $53 million in grants to improve the water quality in the Indian River Lagoon. The grant is going to be used to replace over 3,000 septic tanks and update the wastewater treatment plants. So this will reduce the nutrients going into the lagoon over time. And there's also been a feeding trial for manatees in the northern Indian River Lagoon that has been approved. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are working in a joint partnership to feed animals in the northern Indian River Lagoon this winter. It's a small trial. It's going to have, the animals are going to be monitored for their health, and how much food they're being given. And it hasn't started yet, but if you're interested in learning more about it, the FWC has an FAQ page, and they have answered a lot of the questions there. There are also several organizations that are working together to restore the Indian River Lagoon by raising seagrass and planting them, by the same thing, planting clams out into the lagoon. Clams filter water, so they can be used to filter these excess nutrients out of the water in the lagoon. By planting mangroves, which work as a stabilizer, it also provides food and habitat for a lot of animals, and by planting oyster reefs as well. What can we do to help in our day-to-day? So we can use less fertilizer. One of the biggest inputs of nutrients into the lagoon and other waterways around the state are fertilizers. If you can not fertilize your lawn as often, or even go a season without it, this will significantly improve the water quality. We can throw our trash away and recycle fishing line. This right here, the first image, is a monofilament line recycling area. So if you find any line, you can recycle it there so it doesn't entangle animals. Do not feed or water manatees. I know there is an interest in feeding these animals during this time, but like I said, it is illegal and it does change their behavior. We don't want animals to become accustomed to us feeding them, because they normally leave the area after winter, and if they know that they're going to be fed, they might not leave, and we don't want that. When you're out boating, if you're out on the water, look for manatees. Have a spotter on your boat. Wear polarized glasses. It's the best way to see manatees, especially when the water is turbid and brown and it's difficult to see through. You can report sick, injured, and dead manatees to the FWC Alert Hotline, which is here again. Please write that down if you haven't gotten the chance already. And you can be active in your community. So what are the ways we can be active in our community? We can volunteer for some of these organizations that are doing beach cleanups, seagrass plantings, mangrove plantings, clam monitoring, and water testing. And if you sign up for our newsletter and on our website, we have these events on our website. We don't run them, but we partner with these organizations and try to get the word out there. You can also fill out our manatee sighting form when you see healthy manatees. So we recently redid our manatee sighting form. This is an older version of the image, but if you see a healthy manatee in your area, if you live on the water, if you go out boating, you can report it to our sighting form. You'll report the time, the date, the location where you saw the animal, and the number of animals, as well as their activity. We do not want you to report sick animals. As I said, you want to report that to the FWC. But this way we can record where we're seeing animals around the state and get an idea of what they're doing, and any other type of data we can collect. So if you do see manatees regularly, consider filling out our sighting form, and the link is down here below. So there are some more ways to help. I see the question here. What are some ways to help if you don't live in Florida? So you have to be in Florida to purchase a Save the Manatee license plate. But the Save the Manatee license plate, the funds for that go towards the study of manatees for the state. They go towards the Manatee Trust Fund. But you can also donate to the Manatee Rehabilitation and Rescue Partnership. They have a website and you can donate through there. We also have the Manatee Emergency Fund on our webpage that goes towards the same thing, rescuing manatees. You can donate to Save the Manatee Club, or you can adopt a manatee, and that goes to our conservation efforts. You can also order free materials from our website, especially if you live on the water. You can get signs and educate your neighbors, and you can also sign up for our newsletter. And that's the end. Do we have any questions? Oh, Cora, you're muted.
I just realized that. Sorry, a great presentation. Thank you, Tiara. I was just going to say for those who came in late, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and that way we can address them, whether that pertains to Tiara's presentation or anything else you would like to know about the current situation of manatees. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and between Tiara and then me and Kim will do our best to answer them.
And just another note for folks who joined us late, we will be providing a link to this webinar by email, and then it'll be on our website. So if you missed a portion of the presentation and you wanted to view it later, you're going to be able to do that. And then we're always available to answer questions at conservation@savethemanatee.org. So if you have any questions afterwards that come up, you're welcome to email us there.
So I see a question here that you have a nonprofit office in Florida. Please feel free to reach out to us through our website. We have a contact us form on there. You can email us and we can talk about ways that you can help manatees. So are manatees considered endangered? Manatees are no longer considered endangered. They have been relisted under the Endangered Species Act as threatened, which is a different category. At Save the Manatee Club, we feel that it was too soon to change the listing status of the manatee because the threats that manatees face have not decreased over time. And this was the reason that manatees were originally listed under the Endangered Species Act. We feel that they should be relisted as endangered. Let's see. Kim, this would probably be a better question for you. Is there a certain fertilizer runoff that is causing these blooms that we could get banned in Florida?
So fertilizers in general typically have potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. We always recommend that you use the lowest phosphorus fertilizer that you can. So if you can find a fertilizer that has no phosphorus, that's going to be the best, because most of Florida's soils have plenty of phosphorus in them. As far as banning, we do have local communities have the authority to ban fertilizers through periods of the year, and a lot of counties and municipalities have put fertilizer bans into place during the summer months. But we don't have a statewide effort to ban any fertilizers. I will say that some of the fertilizer companies have reformulated their products so that they are more friendly for Florida. But we always just recommend anytime you're going to apply fertilizer, get a soil test first, understand what the nutrient needs are for the things that you're planting and your soil type at your home, and only apply the minimal amount that you need. So short answer, it's complicated. And there are efforts in place to try to reduce fertilizer use in Florida.
Thank you, Kim. Here's a question for all of us. What would be the best state or federal office to contact to help petition for more funding or protective legislation? So typically the decision-making for whether the Florida manatee is endangered or threatened is through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal agency. So you can contact them. There's also been an initiative to relist manatees as endangered through Congress. But we have more information about that and who you can contact if you do want to reach out to your representatives on our website. The next question, when will they begin feeding manatees, and is this just in one location? So right now, the knowledge we have is that they're starting to feed manatees soon. There hasn't been a specific date, but as I said, if you check the FWC FAQ website for the feeding trial, they will post information as it becomes available. It just hasn't been determined yet. They're still trying to figure out what method they're going to use for feeding the animals. And as of right now, it is only in the northern Indian River Lagoon. It might be expanded, but we're going to start with that one small area, and it's specifically targeting the area that's been hit the hardest by the loss of seagrass. We have the most number of animals that are very thin in the northern IRL. So hopefully this will provide them for some relief. And I want to say that the feeding is only supplemental. So it's not meant to replace all of the food they would typically get in the wild. It's supposed to hold them over until the weather becomes warm enough that they can leave and go out to these areas that do have food.
Yeah, and I think it's also, if I'm just adding to this, it's really important to understand, and I think Tiari really emphasized this in her presentation, the large die-off that we're seeing of manatees is really happening around the Indian River Lagoon in Brevard County along the Atlantic coast. It's not a statewide issue. So oftentimes we read in the media, you know, all manatees are starving, the manatees are starving, but it's really particularly manatees in that area. And that's why those feeding efforts are located specifically to target that area. Now, if you're looking into other areas, there's a lot of problems all around Florida. I'm not trying to say it's only in Brevard County or the Indian River Lagoon, but if you're looking at areas from Blue Spring, for example, I do a lot of the research there. The manatees are actually looking pretty good. There's ample food supply for them in that area, although we're seeing issues as well, and we're addressing those, but it's not meant that manatees are basically being hand-fed everywhere. And one of the main issues, like Tiara pointed out, is that if manatees become accustomed to being fed in a certain area, they're going to stick around. They're not migrating away from that, and then can become really problematic for them in the spring and summer months, when naturally they would migrate to areas where there is food. And then they're staying in this tiny area expecting handouts year round, and that can really be a huge problem. So that just to add to that explanation.
So here's another question about the total number of animals in the state. Should we assume there's around 5,000 manatees in Florida now that there was over 1,000 manatees that died this year? No, because it has been quite a while since there has been an estimate. We didn't know how many manatees there were statewide before the UME, and it's estimated between the number has an error range, so it's unsure exactly how many there were before, a minimum and a maximum. And since then, if manatees were increasing in number and now we lost them, it's just impossible to know exactly how many animals there are. But now that things are reopening, there are plans to do another survey, another estimate for animals. So we should know soon how many there are, and this will be part of whether these animals are relisted as endangered or not. I am from outside of Florida, but would like to volunteer. If you'd like to volunteer, as I said, we partner with other organizations. Right now, we are working on increasing our volunteer efforts. But if you reach out to us, if you reach out to our volunteer coordinator, we can contact you and let you know if there are projects or things that need to be worked on. How will they be feeding the manatees? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kim.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you can fill out that volunteer form, and on the form, there are different categories of ways to help. And so some of those categories involve remote type volunteerism. So take a look at that. You might have an opportunity there for you.
I also just typed the link in the chat as a response to Brenda's question about the volunteering. The link would be savethemanatee.org/volunteer, /volunteer, not .volunteer, or savethemanatee.org/algae, which is the page that Tiara referenced, where we put a lot of efforts that our partner organizations are doing. So those two sites would be good to check out.
These two questions go hand in hand, so I'll answer them both. How will they be feeding the manatees, and how do they feed them without manatees depending on humans for food? So first off, as I said, the manatee feeding effort is supplemental. So it's just enough to get the animals through the winter so that they can move on. We're not going to be providing them enough food that they want to stay. And manatees, every year they leave. That is what they do. When the water gets warm, they go out and they explore, and I do not believe the animals will stay there, especially with the food that we're giving them. We're not trying to make it so this is their new home in the area. And that's one of the big questions, how to feed animals without them imprinting on humans. And that's one of the reasons that this is a study, a small time study, so that they can determine how the manatees respond to being fed. I would guess, and at this point, everything is a guess because it is up to the FWC to make these decisions, that they will not be directly putting food in the animals' mouths with their hands or anything like that, like the way that people do if they're going out of their way to feed manatees illegally, because we don't want the animals to associate humans with being fed. As I said, it's just to get them through the harshest part of the winter so that they can move on. We just moved to Melbourne. Where is the Indian River Lagoon? Well, you're actually right near it. You're you're right in the area. The Indian River Lagoon is huge. It's over 100 miles long, and it stretches over more than one county. But it's actually, the Indian River Lagoon is a grouping of 3 separate lagoons. It is not just one lagoon, but it's called the Indian River Lagoon. And you're right on it. That's a good question. We have another question about the feeding. As the FWC, if you guys are interested, and I know you are, you're going to want to check that FAQ website. Can we put that in the chat as well?
Yes, absolutely. Let me just look that up real quick. So I put the right link to the FAQs, and I'll put that in the chat in just a second.
How can we keep this algae bloom from continuing every year to try and prevent future die-offs? So the first thing is, this is a systemic problem. It's going to require a lot of effort to stop these algae blooms from happening. One of the best ways is going to be reducing the nutrient load entering the system by replacing these septic tanks or improving wastewater treatment. It's a community-wide effort as well. If everyone at the same time were to reduce their use of fertilizer, it would really make a difference, which is why we're trying to educate and spread the message of reducing fertilizing, especially because Florida is, things grow year round here. We've also just submitted an intent to sue we would like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to work together to change some of the legislation so that there has to be less nutrient load into the lagoon. So that is another way that we're working to reduce the load. But really, it's going to take time. Right now, if the blooms come back, it's difficult for seagrasses to grow. So we really need to improve that water quality, reducing these nutrients before we can move forward. Planting clams and oysters, which filter the water, is also a great way to get started with this. I think that's all of our questions. Do we have any more questions? And if you have other questions as well, you can always email us and ask, and we'll answer your questions.
And I just put the 2 links in the chat, the link to the FWC FAQ page, which is a really great page. It's structured into different categories, so you can learn more about specific things, how they're going to try to do the feeding, and also a link to our emergency rescue fund that Tiara mentioned in the presentation. Oh, the link is not coming up. Let me see what's going on here.
When we send out, this is recorded, and when we send out an email with the recording link, we will also include all of the links that were in the chat as well. So if you aren't able to get to them because you're on your phone or for whatever reason, you'll get an email that has that information in it.
Yeah, I don't know why the link is not coming up, but like Tiara said, it's going to be in the email. So for some reason, it's not wanting to do what I wanted it to do.
I was going to add just a couple more things to our conversation about what we can do to help reduce the nutrients that are going into the lagoon, in addition to making sure that we are appropriately fertilizing our lawns. Picking up our pet waste is a big contributor. I mean, picking up pet waste is a great way to help. If you have a septic system, which I know a lot of people don't even know if they have one, get it inspected and make sure that it's operating properly. Those are 3 kind of homeowner ways to help the lagoon.
So we have another question here. Will there be more manatee die-offs becoming a usual thing, or do you think this was not normal? Unfortunately, it is not likely that this problem will stop. As long as there is cold weather and manatees are not able to find food, this will be an issue. Luckily, following what has happened the last year or so, the rescue partnership is really working together to make sure that we have the capacity to house these animals, that we have all the resources we need, that we're in constant contact and talking about this. Another way that we could support animals is asking the governor to increase the funding for the MRP and for capacity, because eventually we will run out of space, which is our worst nightmare. And to have the funds to build more facilities is one of the things we really need. Hopefully with more time, and if we're able to get the seagrass to come back, then eventually this will stop being an issue. But it really is a seasonal issue where we had some type of lull in the summertime when the animals were able to leave. But luckily this area is only in, this issue is mostly focused on the Indian River Lagoon, so it isn't impacting all of the manatees around the state. It really is a localized issue.
On the other hand, we are losing seagrass throughout the St. Johns River and other areas. So if we don't have water quality improvement in a statewide level, particularly on our East Coast, it's likely that we'll continue to see these types of mortalities. But the other thing that we are working toward, and this might be going a little bit more off topic, is opening up more natural habitat for manatees so that they aren't depending on those power plants entirely during the winter time. So there are a lot of dams that have been created and loss of some of their natural habitat, like springs, that we are working with partners to try to advocate for restoration of those springs so they have more natural habitat to be in during the winter time.
So I didn't say this in my presentation, but power plants have not been around forever. And before power plants existed in Florida, manatees had more access to natural springs and canals and areas where they could rest where it was warm. And these power plants and the warm water they create have changed manatees' behavior. So now it's the point where manatees depend upon these power plants in order to survive the winter. So there are plans about what we're going to do long term. Power plants, originally, there were plans to shut them all down, but the manatees have nowhere to go, and it's our fault because we have gotten rid of a lot of their natural winter resting areas. So we can't just turn off the power plants now. We need to have a plan for what we're going to do. And that's one of the reasons that this has become such a big issue, is because the manatees don't really have anywhere else to go, and they have to go to the Indian River Lagoon, and now there's no seagrass there. So it's a man-made issue, this problem. Are there large-scale programs to get more grass back into the lagoon? I'm not sure what large scale means, but there are efforts for many different nonprofits that are doing seagrass restoration in the IRL. Brevard Zoo is one. If you look up seagrass restoration in the Indian River Lagoon, you'll see that there's many organizations over there that are working on it. The issue is that we don't want to plant a bunch of seagrass and then have a bloom come through and kill it all, because that will be a step backwards, especially because if the seagrass all dies off, it'll cause more nutrient problems in the lagoon. So it really is working with all of these different groups, the wastewater treatment, people fertilizing, planting, that it has to be an effort that's community wide in order for changes to be made. So Kim, this is probably a question for you. Is the fertilizer issue mainly due to the average population, like fertilizing our lawns, or is it mostly due to industry like farming?
That's a good question. It's a combination of both, and depending on where you are, the answer is going to be different. So if you're in an urban area, obviously domestic fertilizer use is going to be your biggest contributor. But in areas where I live, like Marion County, agricultural fertilizer is a big issue. Under Florida's water quality regulations, large agricultural producers do have to enroll in what we call best management practices. That's another issue that we've been working with the state on, and one of the reasons that we are looking to EPA to come back to the state and say, you need to do more, because we know that there's more room. The enforcement hasn't been there. The enrollments haven't been there like they should be. And in particular, in the Indian River Lagoon, we've had less enrollment for agricultural operations than we have if you look at the state as a whole. So it's a combination of both things. If that answers the question.
Sorry, I just stopped presenting. Not that manatee isn't cute. And let's see. So I think that's going to be the end of our presentation for today. I'm so glad you had all these great questions. I think we've really had a great conversation. If you do have more questions, please contact us. And if you have questions about other organizations you'd like to reach out to, again, you can reach out to us and we can put you in contact with the right person. We really appreciate you making time for this webinar tonight. And I hope you have the great rest of your week and a great holiday season.
Happy holidays, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.